Before I begin, firstly, I'd like to thank the TEDxDSCE team for having me here. It is my pleasure to not just be here, but I feel truly humbled to be among such an incredible bunch of people speaking on this stage today. And actually, I'll tell you a story about when the TEDx team just reached out to me and said, you know what, we'd like to have you speak at the TEDxDSCE. The first thought that went through my head was, what is it that I should speak about? What is it that means so much to me that I want to be here and share my insight about it with you today? So I did what I would do best. I went to my friends and family. I reached out to them and I said, what do you think defines me? And I'll be honest with you, the narcissistic side in me had an amazing time asking that question because I got really nice answers, right? I felt really good about it. And one of my high school best friends, and I think she's in the audience today as well, she pointed out to me that there was this one thing that I said way too often. It was this one thing that guided my life in more ways than one. It was a phrase that I used in just regular language. That phrase was figure it out. And what happened was, I'd say figure it out for everything. From a professional or a personal crisis, my answer to pretty much everything was, don't worry, we'll take care of it, we'll figure it out. And it was actually as simple as that for me. I'd say it in passing. So the more deeply I thought about it, like I run an organization called Under 25. It is a media and entertainment company which is for the youth and the young of today's country, and which makes me essentially a part of the business of solving one problem after the other. So today I want to talk to all of you about how I solve my problems and how it is possible to deconstruct any of these problems and absolutely kick ass in life. I hear you. I've been interacting with students. It hasn't been too long since I graduated. I've been interacting with students and I know the kind of problems we all face. And what I want to tell all of you is that it is possible to break down each problem and actually deconstruct it in a way where you just achieve way more productivity usually. Now, the more deeply that I thought about how my outlook towards life, the way I solve problems, why I look at problems the way I do, I realized that I got it from my dad. I'm truly blessed to have gotten his outlook towards problem solving, apart from, I think, the good looks, of course. But let me tell you a story about my dad. My dad is an industrialist, and he manufactures various different products. And I still remember this night very, very vividly. It was a couple of years ago when his manager called him from the factory and said that the factory had completely burned down. This was because of a short circuit that happened in some corner of the factory, and the entire place was in shambles. Now, what I want to talk to you all about today is how my dad handled that crisis that night and what we all have to learn from it. And more important, through the course of this presentation, I'm also going to tell you about what he did. But let's look at what a problem really is first, right? What is the dictionary definition of a problem is a matter or situation that is regarded as unwelcome or harmful and needing to be dealt with and overcome. Now, in my mind, there are two parts of a problem. When I break it down in my head, there are two parts to a problem. The first one is the declaration, where you go out there and you say, this is my source of trouble. This is what is bothering me. And in this case, the factory burning down was what was bothering my dad, and that's the source of the trouble. Part two is the consequence. The consequence actually holds the crux, which is where you say, this is the reason why I'm unhappy. This happened, my declaration, and this is the consequence. I'm feeling annoyed, I am bogged down, I'm feeling, and all the negative connotations that you can draw, they all happen in the consequence. Now, I don't think everybody realizes it, but in a situation where the problem solvers exist, there are two kinds. There are the inefficient ones, there are inefficient problem solvers, and there are the efficient problem solvers. The way I think of them is that we don't realize, but subconsciously, we all have a problem-solving cycle. We all go through with it, but we don't realize it. There are a couple of steps that everybody here follows if you are an inefficient problem solver or an efficient one. There are a couple of things that you do very generally. The first is you identify the problem, right? And in the identification process, this is where you're told that there is a problem. This is the part which I told you about, the declaration. This is where you state your source of trouble. After that is when you analyze the problem. Now, an inefficient problem solver, this is the part where, as the consequence for the analyzing part, what he essentially goes on to say is, oh shit, I am ruined. This is the end of me. This is where life comes to an end. This is where the breakdown is. I'm obviously over-exaggerating this, but you get the drift. The consequence happens in the analyzing part. Then you essentially, after you're done brooding over it and you overanalyze and you are upset and you are super worried about everything that has happened, then you sit down to think, okay, now it's time, I really need to fix this, and I'm going to figure out a way to find a solution to this, and that's when you start generating the solutions. After generating those solutions is when you plan one of those solutions that you came up with, and then you implement that. Now, the thing to remember about inefficient problem solvers is that they go through this entire cycle with a truckload of stress. In the center of this entire problem cycle of solving the problem, there is these problem solvers operating at insane levels of stress, especially on step 1 and 2, where you need it most to not be stressed, where you identify and analyze the problem. Now, here's the thing about efficient problem solvers, and I like to put my dad in this category. Now, there is no secret sauce to the problem-solving cycle itself. The problem-solving cycle for an efficient problem solver is exactly the same as an inefficient problem solver. The only difference of what they do differently is that they go through this entire cycle by staying cool. What they do, and especially when they need it the most, which is in the identifying and the analyzing part, where you need to absolutely stay cool. And you go through this entire cycle. Now, what I think is, what I've put together is what I like to call my Figure It Out 101. These are essentially a bunch of hacks that I use in my life to solve pretty much any adversity that comes my way. And I think that these hacks would be useful to you as well, to not just solve a problem, but just generally have an attitude of figuring it out. Firstly, perspective is everything. My dad very easily that night could have thought that that fire was a disaster. But what he did instead, and I remember this very clearly because he stopped thinking about the problem immediately. What he was doing was he was trying to find ways to fix it. What needed to happen had happened, but he was not looking at the problem, but he was looking at how to fix it, which essentially goes on to say that he wasn't concentrating on the problem, but he was concentrating on the solution. And isn't that what all problems are? They're all solutions waiting to be found. Don't you think so? I mean, give that a thought for a second. Problems are solutions waiting to be found. 2, focus on the outcome. Now, I remember that night, my dad reached the factory. The place was in shambles. It was completely reduced to ashes. And he looked at the place and he said, I'm going to give this 15 days. I'm going to take the next 15 days to bring this place back to life, kicking ass the way it's meant to be. And that's exactly what he did. He spent the next 15 days visualizing his outcome. And everybody in this room today, whatever it is that you're having a problem with, any area in your life, personal or professional, if you have a problem, visualize how it would be if that problem did not exist. Visualize if that problem was solved, how would you feel? I want to point out, ladies and gentlemen, that the power of visualization is absolutely incredible. And we completely undermine something that is so important in our lives. And if you do this in your life, I am sure, as it has helped me and many others that I know, it will be of real good use. Now, I know too many people who spend too much time on thinking about the worst case scenario. They keep thinking about what is the worst that could happen. You know what, the worst has happened. But what if you started focusing your energy to actually fixing it, or rather thinking about what is the best that you could do in that scenario? And that's what is the real game changer, right? Because that's what's important. You need to figure out a way to fix it. And that's more important than the consequence, which is negativity itself. And now, more importantly, going on to something that I do in my life, is I have wired myself over the years to ask this question to myself. Every single time that I'm faced with an adversity, the first thing that I say is, Shreyans, how can I figure this out? Think about it. I do talk to myself in first person a lot. So, but a lot of times I go to the extent of saying, okay, how can I figure this out? How can I turn this around? And all of us should try and do that. Because if you go to a point where you say, and you start facing problems just in any generic way, think about how you can turn this around. Because you know what? As soon as you start thinking about how you can turn it around, you have already put yourself on the path of solving that problem. And that's what's most important. Trying to get on the path of stop thinking about the negativity, but start concentrating on the fact that you need to fix it. And I think that's more important than anything else. So there are a lot of other people in this room who have had problems and have reached out to others for help. I sincerely suggest you do so because there are people who've dealt with what you are going through, and they might have come through and come out stronger. It makes sense to ask for help. Just like how I did for this presentation, and you know what, I figured it out. And I'm here knowing that I had asked for help. Now, and this towards the end of the Figure It Out 101 is that night when the factory burned down, the household was very shaken, right? It was, the fear in everybody's faces was very palpable. My dad knew that I was shitting bricks. I was really, really scared. He looked at me and he said, Shreyans, you know I got this. You know I'll take care of it. You don't need to be worried about it. And boom, like that, instantly I felt much better. Now, you know what? I'm not sure if he knew he was going to fix that problem. But the fact of the matter was, he went on to tell me that it was going to be okay. Sometimes when you're in a room where everybody is facing the same problem, it just takes that much courage to just say, you know what, it's going to be okay. Maybe it's not going to be. You don't know if it is going to be. But say that, because when you establish that level of comfort, everybody in the room is already feeling much better because you're going in it with the right state of mind. So I actually think of it as a lot of things that you can do to figure it out. But this is something that we discussed a little earlier, right? What the essence of a problem really is. The dictionary meaning stated that it was a matter or situation that is regarded as unwelcome or harmful and needing to be dealt with and overcome. As soon as you apply the Figure It Out 101 to this, you stop thinking about the fact that it is unwelcome or harmful. You start thinking about the fact that it needs to be dealt with and it needs to be overcome, because that's your figure it out mind thinking. And the two parts of the problem that I told you about earlier, the declaration does not change. That is your source of trouble. Keep it real. It is what is bothering you. You acknowledge the existence of that problem, and that's where you leave the declaration at. But the consequence after you do your Figure It Out 101 to this is when you go, you're not unhappy. You're not bogged down. You are not feeling negative. Your immediate reaction is that you're going to figure this out. Focus on your consequence being the fact that you're going to figure it out for every declaration. And it'll be far easier for you to deal with a problem than it just generally is. Now, I like to think that there is no, and y'all must be thinking that, you know what, like you're coming here and telling me about ways to solve my problem. You don't know what my problem is. You know what, you are right, I don't. But you know what, the most important thing to remember is every problem does not have a pinpoint solution. Because if that was the case, the only way that would be possible is if you went back in time, changed the course of things that happened, and the whole picture changes. But that's not how life works, right? What's happened has happened. But what you need to remember is that all problems do not have solutions, but all problems can be very, very well managed and very, very well handled. Which is why I hope that I've been able to tell you about how I figure it out, and you're able to use the figure it out mind space in your lives as well. But I want to leave you with one concluding thought, ladies and gentlemen. And that concluding thought is the fact that figure it out isn't just a phrase. Figure it out is a state of mind. And that is where we should all aspire to be. Thank you so much for having me here.